I guess I have to start by saying that the title of this video is not a troll. And as funny as it sounds, yes, I am serious. Nicotine is probably good for children. You're probably thinking, but politicus, how could this be? So as part of my university study, I had to study a lot of psychopharmacology. And I think the first part of this kind of has to touch on the conflating of nicotine with cigarettes, because nicotine, of course, comes from the tobacco plant, which is actually a nightshade, a deadly nightshade. Nicotine is one of the most deadly toxins known to man. It doesn't take much to hurt you. On the other hand, that's because it's a very potent acetylcholine receptor agonist. In fact, it's more potent, I think, than acetylcholine itself. Acetylcholine regulates a lot of different functions in your brain and also your peripheral nervous system, but the receptors are different. The receptors in the brain are called nicotinic receptors, which are acetylcholine receptors, and then the receptors in the peripheral nervous system are called muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. Muscarinic receptors are also in the brain. Muscarine is the chemical that's produced by not the magic mushrooms, but the other kind of hallucinogenic mushrooms. The ones that look like the mushrooms from Mario Brothers, red with white dots, Amanita muscaria. And so muscarine is the active chemical in there, and it activates the muscarinic receptors, but not the nicotinic receptors. And nicotine from tobacco activates the nicotinic receptors, but not the muscarinic receptors. And so that's the difference. But that's the acetylcholine system, is those two types. And different parts of the body have different types, depending. While nicotine is technically highly toxic in pretty low doses for comparison to other types of toxins, but yet much higher doses than what you'd find in, say, a cigarette or even like a pack of cigarettes. So the amount of nicotine in a pack of cigarettes, for example, is certainly not even remotely close to what it takes to kill you, let's say. There's that scene in that one movie about the guy who was a tobacco lobbyist or whatever, and they kidnap him in a van and they slap him full of nicotine stickers, and then they're trying to kill him with the nicotine stickers, which technically, if you use enough of them, could work, but they're kind of slow release, so it's very unlikely. Just make you really, really sick, which happens to people who pick tobacco as well. It gets on their hands and absorbs through their skin, and they can get nicotine poisoning, which is not fun. A lot of vomiting, a lot of feeling like you're going to die. Yeah, you do not want to get nicotine poisoning. Not for real. But anyways, even though it's toxic now, the muscarinic system is even worse because certain nerve gases actually, like military nerve gases that, are illegal, supposedly, target the muscarinic system. So, but anyways, we want to talk about nicotine because that's the issue with the vaping, and then we got, the kids are going to vape, and they're going to vape with the nicotine ones, and so people are concerned because nicotine in particular can pretty much just lead to heart disease. And that's the first issue, is the conflating of nicotine simply with tobacco and smoke. So these vape cartridges are not making smoke. It's just some kind of oil that contains a certain percentage of nicotine. Usually it's an inert type of oil like a glycerol or something like that, which has been tested a million times. And that's including inhalation and products for inhalation, medical, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't seem like for a professionally, regulated, manufactured type of, let's say, nicotine vaping cartridge, or even the cannabinoids and so on, the CBD and the THC stuff, it doesn't seem like the standard process that is, regulated where it is made legally by, companies that have, let's say, insurance and, buildings and employees and all of that sort of thing, and taxes to file legally. The idea, that that's a real big risk, I don't think so. The problem we've seen with the current hysteria is, crazy people putting other crazy stuff in there instead of leaving it alone. So they're tampered with, basically. So yeah, I mean, if you drink half your beer and then you pour antifreeze in the rest and then drink that, is that the beer company's fault? I mean, just because they're doing it with a vapor cartridges or whatever instead of a beer, I don't see how it's different. if you put crack in your in your cigarette and smoke it, is that the cigarette company's fault? I doubt it. So starting from that premise, saying let's just assume the nicotine, period, nothing else, just that drug slash poison. If we just say, okay, well, what are the effects of nicotine? So the main effect, the health effect of nicotine is heart disease. And also, it's probably bad if you already have heart disease. It could make it worse. So, and that's the problem, is that is regulated through a process that involves a chemical in your blood which regulates cholesterol, a chemical called homocysteine. And so nicotine, something about how it metabolizes, I guess, messes with the homocysteine in your blood, and that increases the amount of low-density lipoprotein in your blood because homocysteine regulates that. So if you increase homocysteine and then increase, bad cholesterol, basically, and then the nicotine also can increase heart rate, and those things in combination increase the risk of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, for example, of course, with arteriosclerosis, and all of that sort of thing. But those are old people diseases. Children pretty much cannot get those diseases. Those are diseases caused by living, by eating certain foods, more of certain foods, less of certain foods, exercising, etc. over your lifespan can help determine, I wouldn't say determine because there's genetics and other factors, but helps determine your risk for, let's say, heart disease over time. But children don't have a real risk for heart disease if they're generally healthy children. So the only real bad health effect for humans of these sorts of doses of nicotine are basically is that, and children don't get that. So why would it be good for children? Seems like a really stupid question, doesn't it? Well, why is Ritalin good for children? Or is it? And why is it okay to put kids on what essentially is a very close analog of methamphetamine pills every day, but to think that nicotine, because it comes from tobacco, is not a drug? Or at least a drug in the pharmaceutical sense, which is to say to treat something used medically. How could it be? Well, how is Ritalin used medically, supposedly? In an attempt to increase focus and learning, memory, things like that. But what if it turned out that nicotine was the most powerful nootropic that scientists have ever studied? It increases learning and memory and focus to a greater degree than any other substance, any other effect that we've ever seen. I would also contend that nicotine is less dangerous than Adderall, Ritalin, and other amphetamine analogs. But one might think that half of the kids in the country are on those drugs. So what's the deal? When will the hypocrisy sink in? When will these parents who are so worried, or other people who aren't even the kids' parents, I suppose, they're so worried about kids vaping nicotine when I really can't see any negative health effects other than addiction, which with a steady supply of nicotine isn't really a big deal. The doses we're talking about are not dangerous, and in terms of health, if it's a healthy person, then at that younger age, they're actually not really in much of a risk factor, and as long as they quit, let's say by when their brain matures, 24 or so, they should probably quit because it's not really necessarily anymore. But that's when the health risks would start kind of kicking in anyway. Other than that, in terms of actual health risk, I don't see it. And when I look at what is actually being done medically, supposedly in this country, drugging all of the kids with very powerful amphetamine and essentially methamphetamine analogs, Ritalin and stuff like that, it just boggles my mind. The absolute hypocrisy and complete lack of understanding of psychotropic drugs and psychopharmacology. I don't know if it's legal or not, but yeah, somebody somewhere might think about, slapping a nicotine patch instead of pumping your kid full of methamphetamine analogs.